Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to this week's edition of the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. Again, we're streaming out live on X, Rumble, YouTube, BitChute as well, Facebook Live, and also at 21stcenturywire.com and the alternate current radio.com, as well as the audio streams. Thank you for rejoining us. Fantastic segment with Ryan Dawson, our guest, and really kind of switching gears from what we were talking about during the midweek wire on Wednesday, which was the JFK file release and then the JFK assassination. And the insights that came from that were profound for a lot of people. We went into depth on the Israel angle. And we also had a report on Friday on the UK Column News, very short report, but we covered the Israel angle with the JFK document releases, plus a lot of historical information that kind of joins the dots on that. And so Ryan's brilliant not only on that topic, but also on the RFK assassination. Even more compelling if you consider the political ramifications for that and how that basically was yet another turn in U.S. history, maybe in world history, in fact. But certainly the relationship between the United States and the state of Israel changed profoundly after some of these amazing events that were very sad and very tragic for America, but something that people really don't talk about. One of the reasons is because all the files have been buried under classifications, under the Warren Commission, under all these various layers of committees and obfuscation. So we're hopefully getting a little bit of an insight as to what really happened. But the JFK continues to capture the imagination of people everywhere. And one of the people who has also been following this story for a very long time is none other than our own Basil Valentine, who's joining us on the live link right now. Basil, thank you very much for joining us this week.
Yeah, good to see you as always, Patrick. And hello to our viewers and listeners all around the world.
So, Basil, I don't know if you caught any of the last segment with Ryan Dawson, but we were going through the Robert F. Kennedy assassination, another fascinating chapter, to say the least. But what we covered earlier in the week was the JFK file releases. I know we haven't really spoke since this document dump, but I know you've been looking very intently at some of the contents and some of the commentary on it from a lot of the top JFK researchers, some of whom you've spoke to, interviewed, plus you're also very well versed in a lot of the important literature, some of which is now becoming relevant once again. What's your take on the Trump document dump, first of all, Basil?
Well, it was only ever going to be a limited hangout. The documents themselves don't sort of reveal any smoking guns. They've long since fallen silent. But in terms of developing our understanding, a wider understanding of the context of the assassination, and indeed its effect on current social and political commentators. On the one hand, you had Ben Shapiro this week saying that, Kennedy died 62 years ago. It was no more relevant than who killed William McKinley. On the other hand, Candace Owens, who trumps him in viewing figures these days on her own YouTube channel, really went off the reservation and started talking about James Jesus Angleton and how he handled Lee Harvey Oswald, his connections to the Mossad. He was indeed CIA's liaison with Mossad. But also how Lyndon Johnson may actually have been Jewish himself on his matrilineal line from a tribe of Jewish people that emigrated to Texas in the middle of the 19th century after the failure of the 1848 revolution in Germany. Very interesting historical context. So it's opened the can of worms. That is the best way of putting it, really. And yes, now people are starting to look once again at the likes of Michael Collins Piper and William Torbit and Penn Jones, people like that, who had very interesting things to say about the Israel connection to the JFK assassination, which, of course, centers around Kennedy's opposition to the idea of Israel obtaining nuclear weapons Ben-Gurion was furious that Kennedy wanted to inspect the Dimona plant and fobbed off his first team of inspectors, showing them effectively cardboard cutouts. There's also the question that Candace Owens highlighted of the American Zionist organization, later known as AIPAC, which the Department of Justice had requested to register as a foreign agent, which would have meant that its activities were much more closely monitored or even curtailed, whereas AIPAC now intertwines the American and Israeli flag on their stage sets, as indeed they are intertwined in Congress or in the White House. You know, Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, Trump himself, all Israel firsters, as is becoming increasingly obvious to a number of MAGA commentators. But it's also to be remembered that Kennedy wanted a peaceful world, believe it or not. He wanted to turn a page in human history. He wanted to impose a permanent settlement on the Middle East, with Israel in fixed borders and the establishment of a Palestinian state in secure borders alongside it. So it wasn't just the nuclear weapons that signed his death warrant. He was, other people, of course, mentioned the fact that he wanted to print Treasury notes and get away from the Federal Reserve dependency for currency. So there was a collection of reasons why he had to go. And where Israel is concerned, it was the fact that he wanted a permanent settlement as much as the fact that he didn't want them to get nuclear weapons that may have been, because it is only, you know, so far ago now, we're not going to get a signed confession from somebody saying, oh, yes, this is exactly what happened. We have to develop our own understanding of the situation. But there is a lot of evidence that points to a very strong Mossad and Israel connection to some of the key figures that all the researchers, including the liberal researchers, would admit were part of the conspiracy. Finally, it's also worth mentioning that the day Kennedy died, some of the major networks, in their coverage of the aftermath of the assassination, sought to move on very quickly from discussing John Kennedy and his legacy to what happens next. Lyndon Johnson, Kennedy's dead, he's out of the way. So much so that some of the interviewees, key American politicians, were shocked at the speed with which Kennedy's legacy was forgotten, because he's been assassinated twice. He was assassinated in Dealey Plaza in November 1963, but also his agenda, his memory, his legacy, they too have been assassinated, swept under the carpet, forgotten. You even get some people saying, oh, it didn't make any difference. You know, Johnson was a Democrat too, it didn't make any difference, the fact that he was assassinated. Made it, you know, in terms of the course of human history, but it made a big difference. And why do I mention the legacy corporate media? Well, of course, it does tend to favor the Zionist cause. So there was an interest there in moving on quickly from John Kennedy and whatever he wanted to do.
Well, and on that note, mainstream media, legacy media, as you said, Basil, not much has changed in 60 years or whatnot. This was the New York Times coverage of Trump's document dump here. New trove of Kennedy files offers few revelations so far. Nothing to see here. Move along. No, certainly no mention of Israel in any of the files. So they are saying here, but that's not actually the case. There is quite a lot of compelling evidence in this trove of documents, much of which hasn't really fully been digested or analyzed yet. A lot of researchers are going through it. WikiLeaks is also having a crack at some of them. They posted some key initial findings here. But the mainstream media's attitude, Basil, here is basically, Kennedy, it's old hat. So is Ben Shapiro from the Daily Wire. Oh, and don't want to listen to that. That's old hat. It's about as relevant as President McKinley. Nothing to see there. Oh, I don't see what the big deal is, kind of thing. So like anybody who's saying that, usually that makes me more interested in the topic, actually.
Yes, exactly. They can't wait to move on from it, but it does matter still, just as 9/11 matters. People have moved on from that as well. We've never got to the bottom of it. But a few little vignettes, should we say. First of all, people often talk about George Bush the first being in Dallas on the day of the assassination. Also in Dallas that day was Yitzhak Rabin, who subsequently, of course, became Prime Minister of Israel. And he was there the day before and the day of the assassination, and was immediately promoted to the position of Chief of Staff in the Israeli army as soon as he returned to Israel. Just a coincidence. It's worth remembering, too, that in November 1963, after Kennedy was assassinated in the Arab world, it was widely believed that it had been an Israeli plot. And let's not forget, rise and kill first, the subject of the book about Mossad's mass extermination campaign is probably the best way of putting it, of anybody who seeks to delegitimize Israel, which was still only 17, 18 years old in 1963. So still a very young state, and yet seemingly with its tentacles, deeply embedded in the United States at that stage, but not anything like to the degree that is now the case. Of course, the interest in the whole JFK thing was ignited by the movie JFK, Oliver Stone, 1993, which of course focuses on Jim Garrison and his prosecution of Clay Shaw. Now, Candace Owens pointed out this week that that film was financed by Arnon Milchan, Mr. Israel, Israel's biggest arms dealer, as well as being a film producer. And therefore, the film is a limited hangout. It doesn't mention any Israeli connection at all. But Clay Shaw did have not only CIA, but also Mossad connections through Permindex, which was basically a Mossad front company run by Tibor Rosenbaum. Now, to go back to Garrison, Garrison was, of course, investigating Shaw. He was visited by a businessman called King, who was working for Tibor Rosenbaum via his colleague. Let me just get the name up. Give me 1 second here. That's right. Kornfeld. Bernie Kornfeld was a bagman for Rosenbaum. Rosenbaum referred to as Mr. Israel by Israeli newspapers. And Kornfeld sent John King to see Garrison to say, you're getting close here. We'd rather you back off. How about you become a judge and we forget about all this business? And Garrison showed him the door, of course. But ultimately, Garrison's investigation, unfortunately, went nowhere.
Yeah, that's the famous film by Oliver Stone with Kevin Costner. I mean, it did get a lot of people interested in the topic, no doubt. And it seemed like there was a lot of interest and almost public pressure for answers on that. So that film would have been late 80s, early 90s, right? So that would have been approximately
early 90s, yeah.
Yeah, so you're talking about I don't know, 30 years, I guess, 30 years
over
after.
30 years ago, but still about 30 years after the event. So
yeah,
roughly half time now in terms of the total time that's elapsed between the assassination and today.
Yeah, it's funny, and I commented on this with Ryan and also in the UK column on Friday and I kind of came to realize this while I was talking to Ryan Dawson last week on the JFK Files, is that there's two questions for any of these events. There's who did it, and how, like the gunman and the weapon, and then there's why, and what's the motivation behind the why? Because I'm more interested in that second question, Basil. But it seems like a lot of the energy on JFK has been focused on the who and the how. Oswald, lone gunman, the Italian rifle, book, Texas book depository, one gunman, two gunmen, etc. Stand down order for the Secret Service as the cars are going by. There's a lot of clues and a lot of things that don't add up in terms of what the official story they ran with for so long. But ultimately, a lot of that's a dead end if you want to know why. And so that's the question I'm interested in, Basil. And I know you're fairly well read on this topic. So what do you think?
Well, there's a pivot between, on the one hand, the Israeli connection, and then on the other hand, people like Bunker Hunt and the Joint Chiefs and whoever, messed about with Kennedy's corpse, and of course the driver of the limousine who stopped in the kill zone. So it's not quite as simple as just to simply say this was a Mossad plot, because there were elements of the United States deep state that also wanted Kennedy out of the way. Believe it or not, but there were hotheads in the American military who were calling for nuclear war, just as they are beginning to again now. Certainly in the United Kingdom, with that idiot Starmer posing in a nuclear submarine last week and saying that Vladimir Putin is afraid of Britain's nuclear weapons. It's really one of the most ludicrous, infantile, and dangerous stunts I've ever seen by a British Prime Minister. But I digress. Just to go back to Shaw briefly and the why. Shaw's defense was paid for by Edgar Stern, the husband of the heiress Edith Stern. She due to inherit the Sears Roebuck fortune. They were big backers of Clay Shaw, and they were also big investors in the Apollo nuclear plant in Philadelphia, from which the Israelis obtained their nuclear materials.
NUMEC, yeah.
That's right.
That's actually the topic. We'll bring this back up on screen. A film by Ryan Dawson here. We'll bring that up on screen. NUMEC. There it is. That's for free on Rumble, by the way, how Israel stole the atomic bomb and killed JFK. I've watched this film, Basil, and I don't know if you've seen it, but it makes a lot of sense. It's very well researched, very well produced. It's very tight, this film. And the information in here is explosive. Again, Ryan Dawson, independent filmmaker, our previous guest on today's program. NUMEC is the film, folks. And actually, that's our feature on the Sunday screening this week. If you go to 21stcenturywire.com, you'll see NUMEC there. In our features section, we'll be showcasing that film this week for our listeners and readers as well, Basil. So, there's more than a little bit of evidence along that plot line, Basil. So now,
yeah, and then people talk about the mob, of course, and the CIA being involved. Howard Hunt. It's believed that there was a shadow conspiracy to assassinate Kennedy, which, believe it or not, Oswald became dimly aware of shortly before the time of his death. And he wanted to warn Kennedy and the authorities about this plot. And rather like 9/11, where there were exercises on the day, and we've seen this before with these false flag events, there are often supposedly dress rehearsals for terrorist outrages, which somehow then turn into the real event. Patrick, we saw that playbook repeatedly in the early part of this century. Fortunately, that's quietened down a bit. So there's that aspect to it as well. But yeah, the shooters were hired by the mob, but it wasn't that the mafia was powerful enough to decide they wanted to kill the president and then cover it up and then murder dozens and dozens of material witnesses in the 10, 20, 30, 40 years subsequently.
Yeah, that's the other after the fact, the mopping up operation, the
Yes.
cover-ups, and as you said, number of people knocked off. Now, another name that comes up, Basil, is the name of an author named Michael Collins Piper. His name has resurfaced this week because of some of the findings that he had in his work that seemed to be coalescing with the information that's now coming forward. What do you have to say about that angle?
Well, yeah, dear old Mike Piper, sadly no longer with us. He died about 10 years ago. Some people say very suspicious circumstances in which he died in his mid-50s. And all I can say is I recommend people to go and have a look at his book, Final Judgment, which is available in PDF online. And there are also, if you dig around, you can find one or two lectures by Michael Collins Piper.
Final Judgment. Yeah, we'll put that up on screen so people can see. What is it about this book in particular and his work that you think is really key?
Well, he was the first one to sort of bring up the Israel connection in print. He's not actually a JFK buff. He isn't hadn't been sort of immersed in the literature for decades, but it was suggested to him that he write a book on the assassination. And when he started doing his own research, he found that a lot of roads seemed to lead back to Israel, including getting rid of the loose end. I'm talking, of course, about Oswald himself, who was shot in the Dallas police headquarters by Jack Ruby, aka Rubenstein, who himself subsequently died of very aggressive cancer within a couple of years. And ironically, very aggressive cancer weapons were being developed at that time, that you can find literature about all this, Dr. Mary's Monkey and other books, and were employed by the CIA to get rid of other undesirables, including possibly Bob Marley, yes, the Jamaican reggae singer. But I digress. The thing about Jack Ruby was, of course, that he was tied to the mob, and he is supposed to have said to an Israeli journalist while sitting in his prison cell, when asked why he killed, uh, why he shot Lee Harvey Oswald, that he did it for the Israeli people, which would be an extraordinary confession. But yeah, he had all sorts of intelligence connections. And how come he was allowed to get within a few feet of this most wanted man in the world, who was supposedly in custody, and shoot him live on television at the time?
Jakob Leon Rubenstein, not Jack Ruby as he's commonly known, which is interesting that he's referred to by a stage name and not his real name, because his real name is quite fascinating. A Polish Orthodox Jewish family, if I'm not mistaken, Chicago, and very much committed, I think, to the faith and so forth. And there's a lot of conflicting witness statements about interviews made with him or things that he had confided, in particular to his rabbi, as well. And so a lot of this raises a lot of questions about his role, and was it much more than what the sort of general official story is, that he was just this kind of mobster, ran strip clubs. It's much deeper than that.
That's right. He was so angry, he was so upset, you see, about the killing of Kennedy, that he just had to rush out and kill the man who was supposed to have killed him. But it doesn't make any sense really at all. In fact, it's generally believed that the aim was to get rid of Oswald before he'd even been arrested, because once he was arrested, there was always a danger that the whole thing would go to trial, in which case the case against him would collapse. Yep. It's worth just saying at this point that there are, believe it or not, still some commentators out there who wish to prop up what I call the Oswald fiction. Who want to try and still make out that actually the Warren Commission was, all perfectly fair, and told the truth, and there's nothing more to see here. I mean, if you go to the BBC or something today, they'll still tell you that Oswald killed Kennedy. I mean, it's quite unbelievable, really.
Yeah, there's very few mainstream journalists have any appetite or desire to, look past the sort of very dodgy official story. So, I mean, I guess that's just. I think for fear of being called a conspiracy theorist, and again, that term has been created and maybe weaponized in reaction to questions about, ironically, about JFK's assassination.
Yeah, it was the late 1960s when the CIA inserted that term into the lexicon in order to discredit people who questioned official narratives. And it's been very effective for 30 or 40 years. But I like to think that it is now losing its potency, that people have begun to see through it and are realizing that so-called conspiracy theorists are simply people who want to ask questions and do some research. But even asking questions, remembering COVID, Patrick, that was deemed unnecessary, foolish. And if you listen to Ben Shapiro, you shouldn't ask any questions about JFK either.
Yeah, it's totally irrelevant, and especially any reference to Israeli intelligence. That's even more irrelevant and not worth
Well,
your time.
the sad thing is that you can draw a line very directly from the assassination of John F. Kennedy to the horror in Gaza unfolding in front of us. It's as simple as that. If he'd lived, if he'd imposed a permanent settlement on the Middle East, we wouldn't be in this situation now.
Yeah, it wouldn't have had the 6-Day War, wouldn't have
That's
had
right.
everything else that's happened after that. But
With also all sorts of Lebanese and Syrian people who had nothing to do with anything would still be alive.
yeah,
Uh, you know,
but many Israelis would say, especially Zionists, hardcore Zionists, well, they won't say that out loud, but if there was a permanent settlement in 1964 or something like that, or
yeah,
during his reelection as president,
yes,
and likely he would have been reelected,
oh yes,
then we wouldn't have the Greater Israel Project would have been dead in the water. So there's different factions have different preferred outcomes. Let's just say about what's happened. I personally will go with the former, which is what you're saying, and not with the latter, which is what we've got today, which is hell on earth, basically. So
yes.
it's history. I think we can agree, Basil. History took a very untoward turn in 1963.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't alive then, but I remember my father saying that the whole world was depressed by Kennedy's assassination. That his presidency coming as it did, 17 years after 15 years after the end of the Second World War, which had wrought so much destruction on the planet, globally, so much destruction in Europe, the first atomic bombs, so on and so forth. And then just emerging after the era of rationing although we talk now about the fabulous 50s,
Mm.
actually, it was still very much an era of Western nations rebuilding themselves after the total shattering. And then you had this young, dynamic, extremely eloquent, very positive man elected president of the United States who wanted to build a different kind of world altogether. And if you go back and listen to his speeches, they really are quite remarkable, really very moving, really very sad to think that his assassination. I mean, you've got to look too, as you say, obviously his brother was murdered. And since then, um, only very rarely has anybody been allowed to emerge on the world stage with anything like the same optimistic message. Since then, the last 50 years, we've had nothing but pragmatists and neoliberals and hardliners and hawks of various Hughes. Do you follow me, Patrick? You know, that
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
almost as if they didn't take the chance after Kennedy and have to blow somebody's head off again. So let's just stop anyone ever getting anywhere near power that we don't approve of. Most recent cases, of course, being, well, in the United States, Ron Paul, his campaign was torpedoed effectively by the media. I remember him, polling second in one poll, and yet in the discussion of the poll, his name wasn't mentioned at all.
New Hampshire,
Uh,
first primary. I
yeah,
think it was in 2008 or 2012. I can't remember. He ran twice, very successful in both elections. But, they gave us Obama. That was meant to be the new first black president. Had an air of JFK optimism around him, but
yes,
it turned out to
it
be
turned
a
out to be,
Wall Street creation, didn't it?
yeah,
In the end,
turned out to be a mirage.
a
Yeah,
fugazi. It turned out to be a
that's right.
fugazi, as they say. In
And then in Britain, for all his faults, and I disagree with him on a number of issues, but Jeremy Corbyn was uh,
Mhm.
equally popular and a peacenik by
Mhm.
instinct, and he was politically assassinated very successfully. I mean, he isn't even a Labour MP now. It's extraordinary to think he sits as an independent. He was leader of the party only a few years ago.
Yeah,
So,
and the Israel connection there too, and
you don't say.
Olaf Palme from Sweden.
Olaf Palmer. Yes,
There's another one.
there's
And
another one.
there's an interesting investigation to be had there too, which
Yes.
is very much our friend and colleague Mats Nilsson, the great Swedish political analyst and historian and researcher. He also has got quite a bit of interesting insights into that. Another potential world leader with a wide appeal, international appeal, gravitas, and a very
Yes.
powerful message. And we had another Fugazi. Bill Clinton was a bit of a Fugazi in that respect. He was, shepherding the Oslo peace process, which we all know was a ruse, basically. Ronald Reagan had his type of a latter stage Cold War gravitas, but was really riding the wave of, I think, inevitability in terms of the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Well, Reagan, not a lot of people know this, was heavily linked to Sidney Korshak, super mob. I don't know if you know, this was a sort of elite mob uh, comprising largely Jewish individuals tied to Meyer Lansky, and they helped massage Reagan's career all the way to the White House via a
Mm.
presidency of the Screen Actors Guild and then governor of California. Sidney Korshak was named the most powerful lawyer in the world by the FBI, originating from Chicago. He then went to Los Angeles. Of course, there was mild pushback against the loan guarantees by George Herbert Walker Bush after Reagan, if you remember.
Israel.
And exactly,
Yeah.
yes, the loan guarantees. He wanted to halt the settlement building, and
Mm.
the corporate media dumped on him as well. They
Yes.
went for Bill Clinton, who was he blackmailed by Mossad agent Monica Lewinsky? You tell me, Patrick.
I think it's safe to say he was, and that came out building of an audacious political dynasty. I think William Halper, Halper was former editor of the Weekly Standard, wrote that book released in 2014 about how Benjamin Netanyahu was blackmailing Bill Clinton. They had all the sex texting between Monica and Bill, and they were blackmailing him to ultimately do a number of things, including secure the release of Jonathan Pollard,
Oh
the Israeli
yes,
spy, and the pardon of, guess who, in the last minutes of the Clinton administration? None other than Mark Rich,
of
the
course.
Israeli mega donor and a very much an inside man. So there's a lot going on there in the Clinton administration. And he also did his job for illegal settlements. He bought time for Israel to build hundreds of thousands of those illegal settlements, ultimately killing the two-state solution. That was Bill Clinton. But he was lauded as the peacemaker at the time,
Yes,
but he was doing the bidding of the hard right in Israel. But Reagan, I mentioned Reagan, Basil, because he also had an attempt on his life. He came within millimeters of
Yes.
dying in an assassination attempt early in his first term. He miraculously recovered. I mean, they look at the schematics on the bullet on that, came within millimeters of piercing his major aorta or something like this. I mean, he nearly bought the farm, and it's an incredible story that he survived. Went on to win re-election in 1984, in the 84 election. So, I mean, why would they want to get rid of Reagan? Who was behind that? That's another story that maybe we haven't looked as closely at. I think America just wanted to get past that. They do that in America. Say, wait, let's just bury the hatchet and move on. Like 9/11. There's just so much toxicity with that issue. Let's just move on. We've healed already. We need to move forward. We can't be dredging up these things in the past. I think JFK had an air of that as well. It's kind of an American tradition, Basil, to
Mm.
sort of look with derision at any of these unsolved mysteries in the past. And I wonder how much of that is genuine or is media induced, or intelligence, deep state induced. Conspiracy theorists, nobody wants to be a conspiracy theorist. Nobody wants to be called a conspiracy theorist, although the conspiracy theorists are being vindicated.
Yeah, there's a lot more noticing going on these days.
Noticing,
That's what we're
that's
calling
the
it now.
word.
Yes,
That's the
that's the
watchword.
new buzzword. That's
Noticing.
the new buzzword.
Mm,
People are noticing things,
mhm.
and some people don't like people noticing things. Some people get very hot under the collar about other people noticing things. You
No,
know,
some people don't like it when you're just asking questions. That makes
that's
some
right.
people very uncomfortable when I say, "Hey, I'm just asking questions." That's like a microaggression to certain people, who I
Yes,
won't mention, who we did previously mention, like Ben Shapiro,
yes.
for instance. So interesting.
Before we go, I do just want to touch on this piece by Philip Giraldi on the UN's review,
Okay.
um, which is about the crackdown on free speech in the United States. It's becoming very, very, very serious. All sorts of professors, students being arrested, deported for criticizing Israel. Um, Columbia adjunct professor Stuart Carle called on students to refrain from posting about Palestine. If you have a social media page, make sure it is not filled with commentary on the Middle East, he told them. When a Palestinian student objected to the idea of Columbia promoting censorship and bowing to the demands of the Trump administration, the journalism school's dean, Jelani Cobb, was even more direct. Nobody can protect you, she told the student. These are dangerous times.
Mahmoud Khalil. This is a landmark case in the U.S., and it's incredible. And we have to repeat it, Basil. Unfortunately, the right, who were shrieking about the woke left, wanting to cancel them, and saying that speech can't be violence. They're treating us conservatives, they're saying our speech is violence, and how outrageous that is. And we need to, we need free speech and all that. We got all of that during Trump 1.0, and
He's
during
still getting it from Musk and Vance.
from Musk, yeah, and during Biden, and now the biggest voices for cancellation, for shutting down the First Amendment, and deporting people, like physically kicking people out of the country who dare to protest the actions of the state of Israel, who happen to have a leader who is wanted for war crimes in the International Criminal Court. Not a trivial thing. But if you raise these issues, if you advocate for Palestinian human rights, you are then deemed to be a terrorist or a terrorist supporter, ergo, you must be deported. That's insane.
Well, that's right. It's one of these magic words, terrorist. It's like anti-Semite, or it's supposed to justify anything at all. You can indiscriminately kill and mutilate as many children as you like, but if you do it in the name of a state, then it's okay. Whereas any resistance to that from smaller groups that don't have an army behind them, that's terrorism. And this actually goes all the way back to 1945 and the establishment of the State of Israel, which was never supposed to happen without the Palestinian state alongside it, because Israel enjoys the trappings of statehood and is able, through relentless propaganda, to cast any resistance to its territorial ambitions as terrorism. And particularly since 2001, terrorism is this magic word. It doesn't matter if I kill 50, 100, 500, 50,000 people. That doesn't matter, because I'm a state. I can do it. But you, if you resist, if you kill a few people, you're a terrorist, you see. And the whole framing means that has resulted in the genocide.
Yeah, you can get away with, it allows states, governments to get away with mass murder, genocide, crimes against humanity. That's what we've seen. So this is incredible that the America cannot find their moral or constitutional compass on this issue. Why is that?
Well, decades of blackmail and bribery, basically, and browbeating. So, and Kennedy's assassination set the stage for that. It was the beginning of the end of a genuinely independent United States. And people like Candace Owens are and more genuine conservatives, as well, of course, as a phalanx on the left, are beginning to realize it. That's the single sort of green shoot that we can see coming out of this. But of course, Apex still has all the money and the networks behind it. I mean, even those few people on MSNBC who are mildly critical of Israel, they've all been sacked.
Yeah.
Fox News is absolutely disgusting positions on the subject from people like Jesse Waters. Really, really, really tasteless stuff. So
yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too much into the Fox cat and nine tails, but people like Jesse Waters and so many others, they also have conflicts of interest because they themselves are either somehow related to or identify with or etc. with the group in question or the country in question. So, and this is so many people on Fox that fall into that category. So how could they be objective in their commentary as journalists, as media people? And not to say that they haven't done good journalism on other subjects. They have. All of them. Fox is much better in opposition, I tell people. When they're the opposition party at Fox, they do really good, funny, hard-hitting, interesting, ironic journalism and media coverage. When they're in power, it's terrible. It's a nightmare. They're terrible. They're still doing a victory lap right now, and they're dancing on the graves of dead Palestinians. Quite frankly.
Well put.
I don't mean to be, overly flippant or whatever, but that's kind of how a lot of people view that. A little bit too much enthusiasm for the bombs, a little bit too much enthusiasm. It's not a good look.
Unfortunately, I used to have a bit of a soft spot for Emily Campagno and Harris Faulkner, and to a lesser extent, Kayleigh McEnany,
outnumbered.
But I've stopped watching them. I'm not looking at Fox.
The skirts are no longer sexy, are they? They're
no. There's nothing sexy about genocide.
Yeah, might as well be like razor blade skirts. Not nice at all. I mean, it's everybody's descended into this groupthink. It's almost like you can't be in the club, the media club, as it were, unless you adopt certain viewpoints.
That's right. And central to those viewpoints is that all Palestinians are subhuman. I mean, the point is that Israeli society has moved a long, long way to the right since the assassination of Kennedy. At that time, there was still this myth of liberal Zionism that everybody sat around in a kibbutz singing Kumbaya. That was never the case. But at least with Rabin, there was talk of a two-state solution. It got relatively close in the 1990s. All that's off the table now. Israel has become an openly exterminationist state. There hasn't been a single day in years that they didn't kill, at least one or two Palestinians, and often, as we know, hundreds more than that. And yet it seems that to be part of this corporate media group think you have to endorse that exterminationist position. You have to row along with, quite frankly, the Jewish supremacism that Israel is based on and the total dehumanization of Palestinian people. Witness the Trump's negotiator who dared say that Hamas were, Alan Bowler, was it, dared say that Hamas were actually okay guys and they didn't have horns growing out of their heads. And so he had to be fired, and thousands more people have been killed and mutilated since. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, that was a funny episode. So yeah, I mean, Trump and what the shenanigans and the antics that the Trump administration are up to their eyeballs in at the moment, it warrants another discussion, Basil. So we'll save that for another time. But I think we're going to wrap up this segment. Really appreciate you joining us. And again,
my pleasure.
Basil Valentine is the political editor at ThePulse.Today. You can also find his work and some of his great interviews and broadcasting skills there. Basil, where and how can people find you?
I'm back there 10 a.m. UK time on Tuesday with a 2-hour show. And in fact, I'll be joined on Tuesday by the UK representative of the Palestinian Refugee Centre, Tagrid Al-Mawed, at 10 a.m. UK time on Tuesday morning. Ironically, there's a film doing the rounds about censoring Palestinian voices. The film is called Censoring Palestinian Voices. And guess what? That film's being censored.
Oh.
So we won't be censoring Tagrid on Tuesday.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. And thank you for keeping this issue at the forefront. It's a very important issue. And we really appreciate all of your work. Basil Valentine, great to see you. And we will be linking up very soon, hopefully.
Thank you, Patrick.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Basil Valentine, again, political editor at ThePulse.Today. That's all we've got time for. This has been an absolutely fascinating episode. 2 brilliant conversations with Ryan Dawson, of course, our guest, Basil Valentine. And listen, if you walk away from today if you still think you need more information on Robert F. Kennedy and John F. Kennedy's assassinations, well, we probably will be digging into it a little bit more as we have time. And we've hooked up with some of our research cohort that are also going through some of these documents independently. So we'll be catching up to them. So yeah, there's more to learn there, but certainly connecting the dots with Israel's clear motivation and clear involvement in U.S. intelligence and the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the U.S. president. I think it's very relevant till today, still shaping U.S. policy in United States and Western relations with the state of Israel. I think that's still very important, still very relevant indeed. So we're going to keep looking into it. Listen, that's all we've got time for this week. This has been the Sunday Wires Sunday Omnibus broadcast. Hello to everybody at Alternate Current Radio Network. And also a big thank you to a couple of people that came in to donate and subscribe to 21wire.tv. As you know, we just finished our winter fundraising drive last week. And there's been some great people that have showed up for us. We really need your help. We're launching new programs like the Midweek Wire. We've got a third program we're still working on any day now. It'll be more of an informal walk and talk type program, but that's coming, and it'll probably be like Monday and Saturday, something along those lines, or Saturday and Tuesday. So I'll bring us up to a couple of four original programs per week, and more to come definitely, as well as a revamp of 21wire.tv. That's our members suite, and you'll be very happy when we get that done, but it's a lot of work, and one thing at a time. So we're just crossing off the tasks as we go along. So listen, we're going to leave you for today. It's been a fantastic episode, and take care, you all, and we'll see you on Wednesday for the midweek wire. So looking forward to that. All the best. See you next time.
Genocide is never justified. There ain't no reason, 'cause human beings are more than just a kind, defined by race or religion. 'Cause we all have souls and a mission here on earth. Only God knows why. You can't decide their death, 'cause you weren't here for their birth, or their first laugh or cry. Don't let the children die. Don't let the children die. Sisters and brothers, we know it's wrong when we see their fathers cry with their mothers. Genocide is never justified. There ain't no reason, 'cause human beings are more than just a kind, defined by race or religion. 'Cause we all have souls and a mission here on earth. Only God knows why. You can't decide their death, 'cause you weren't here for their birth, or their first laugh or cry. Don't let the children die. Don't let the children die. Sisters and brothers, we know it's wrong when we see their fathers cry with their mothers. Don't let the children die. Don't let the children die. Sisters and brothers, we know it's wrong when we see their fathers cry with their mothers.
of eyes contact. They watch our every move. They examine our togetherness like we've got something to prove. I've looked behind your eyes. I've seen the sadness you hide. I've looked into your eyes. I've seen the tears that you've cried. No, I won't get used to these chains. No, I won't get used to these chains. In the legal arena, upset theaters are staged. She moves in circles. Her cruel games cause delays. From the questions you ask me, like why can't you come home tonight? From the moment you hold me, it's the shortest hour of my life. No, I won't get used to these chains. They say I've got to be careful with what I say. Their conspiracy of silence. They think the truth will lead you astray. They say that they're here for you, but they never listen to what you say. They've built walls between us. I will walk through walls to break these chains. No, I won't get used to these chains. No, I won't get used to these chains.